Hey there everyone, welcome back to Utility Sports. Really excited to cover the Toronto Raptors with a trade guide video here today, continuing our trade guide series. And I really wanted to place an emphasis on getting to Toronto early here for you Raptors fans out there. I know how dedicated, I know how passionate you are about your favorite team, and I wanted to reward that by covering them extremely early in the cycle this time around. Typically, I have waited until January, even sometimes early February, to record a trade guide for the Raptors. Wanted to get this one out early, so I hope you guys do really enjoy. If you do, smash that like button and also subscribe, Raptors fans. Also, comment down below, "We the North," in the comment section. I want to see some real hype for the Toronto Raptors and from their fan base in the comment section today. Remember, I read every single comment as well. I'll be leaving little hearts on every single We the North comment. So make sure to go down there, leave one right now. And let's get into it here with the video preview. We're going to talk about tradable players that the Toronto Raptors have. We're going to look at their contract situations as well. We will then build on that to look at their draft pick situation. Those two areas together, the tradable players and contracts plus the draft pick situation, really gives us a good look not only at the current iteration of Raptors basketball, but also at the long-term direction and the future of Toronto Raptors basketball, which is extremely important to consider anytime you think about mock trades, anytime you think about what Masai Ujiri could possibly be trying to get done this trade deadline. We're going to look at long-term cap space as well. That is another avenue or opportunity for teams to improve on. Do the Raptors really have a foot in that race or not? We'll also look at the buyer-seller category. Do I think Toronto will buy? Do I think they will sell? Do I think they'll do a little bit of both? That's always a fascinating discussion when Masai Ujiri is the leader of key basketball decisions there in Toronto. Then we'll finalize the video by talking about the projected activity level. What do I actually expect to have happen? Will the Raptors make trades? Who will they trade? When will they trade him? We'll talk about all of that and more in this video. Starting with the tradable players. First of all, I do not have a lot of the key core young pieces in this video. And the reason behind that here specifically, I think that the internal core is viewed to be Scotty Barnes, Emmanuel Quickley, RJ Barrett as probably the heart and center of that. For that reason, I do not have them listed in this tradable players section for those reasons, okay? But the players I do have in this tradable player section are some more veterans, players who are on shorter contracts, players that I could see Masai Ujiri moving. Now, remember, historically speaking, when it came to Fred VanVleet, when it came to some of the older players that Toronto has had on their roster throughout the course of recent history, for the most part, Masai Ujiri has not been quick to trade them, and it has in fact allowed players to leave via free agency. That has been a little bit of a shift in recent years, where last year he traded OG Anunoby to New York, he traded Pascal Siakam to Indiana. So we're seeing kind of maybe a little bit of a revolution for Masai Ujiri's tactics when it comes to operating around the trade deadline. Now, Bruce Brown Jr., who he did get part of that Pascal Siakam trade, 1 year, $23 million contract. This is the type of player contenders would love to have. Although one thing that you're going to notice throughout the duration of my videos throughout the trade deadline here, $23 million, anywhere around that price point is going to be very difficult for some teams to get to when it comes to the second apron, how that limits the trade market a bit. And then there's a bunch of teams hard capped. There are about 15 to 20 teams hard capped either at the first or second apron. So there's a lot of teams that really do not have a ton of flexibility, a ton of maneuverability, even with a large amount of trade exceptions out there right now. Teams don't have ways to just take an extra salary because of the new NBA CBA mechanisms that are really changing and altering not only how the trade deadline is going to work, but also my coverage of the trade deadline. I've had to put in so much extra work this year to really familiarize myself with each individual team situation. And I think for teams like Toronto, who have a bigger contract like Bruce Brown's to trade, I'm just not really sure if there's actually going to be a ton of deals out there, a plethora of options for them to actually explore a trade, even though a large number of teams in a vacuum would want Bruce Brown Jr., but he is still a valuable player. Maybe Toronto could squeeze out a late first-round pick or a vast collection of second-round assets for him. I know some viewers will probably roll their eyes at second-round picks. They can be valuable, especially if you have them in plenty, having a ton of different options to maybe throw darts at the dartboard, so to speak, when it comes to the NBA draft. Jakob Poeltl, a player that Toronto just recently traded for a couple of years ago, he's been playing some really good basketball for stretches of the season. He's on a 2+1 contract here worth in totality $56.5 million. His number comes in a little bit shy of $19 million. And I want to talk specifically about a second apron team that cannot trade for him. That is the Phoenix Suns. Jakob Poeltl would be a very good fit with Phoenix. He would be a tremendous option for them if the money worked out. It just flat out does not. The Suns, who are a second apron team, cannot aggregate players together in a trade. Jakob Poeltl makes slightly more money than Jusuf Nurkic. He makes a little bit more money than Grayson Allen. The Suns have no functional way, because of the new CBA, to go out and acquire a player like Jakob Poeltl. And this is where teams like Toronto will be really hurt by the way that the trade marketplace has been altered, because a team that, in Toronto, they would have loved to have traded Jakob Poeltl in a vacuum to Phoenix for maybe a pick swap and this, that, and the other thing, right? That's not really an option now at this point in time. And not really an option. It's just flat out not an option. So you have to keep that in mind here for a team like Toronto. Not only are the teams in the second apron getting hurt, they don't have the flexibility, but it's also impacting the overall flexibility of all the other teams in the league, even those not in the second apron, which I think is a really important nugget to consider and to remember going into the 2025 NBA trade deadline. Kelly Olynyk, a player who I am very fascinated with and I think can be a real swing player on a contending team, being like a 7th, 8th man, a real backup front court option for a team who provides just so much flexibility, versatility. You can play him as a 4 next to another big. You can play him for stretches and durations of time as a stretch 5 himself. He likes to handle the basketball, makes a lot of decisions out on the perimeter. He shoots above the break a pretty good amount as well and shoots it at a pretty solid, respectable clip. This is a valuable player, and he's on a very movable deal. 2 years, $25.2 million in totality. That is a tradable contract, a little bit like covering right around $12.5 million a year. That's a player that teams are going to, have a lot of interest in. A team that I really think makes a ton of sense for Olynyk would be the Los Angeles Clippers as a change of pace option behind Ivica Zubac. Zubac's obviously one of the better short rollers in the NBA, sits in the pocket extremely well, works really well with James Harden. Kelly Olynyk, I think, makes a lot of sense for them as kind of a spell to him, or a player who could also function alongside Zubac for stretches too, which I think would give a real dynamism to the Clippers that they're lacking at this point in time. I think the Clippers need to go a little bit bigger. Chris Boucher, another player I could see a team like the Clippers or the Lakers maybe even exploring. His length, his size, one of the premier three-point shot blockers, and I kind of say that jokingly. The best three-point shot blockers block like 6 to 8 of them a year sometimes. So it's not like he's a super high-volume shot blocker on the three-point line, but comparatively, he's had a pretty good track record of being that. He has aged a bit, obviously not the same player he was 3-4 years ago, but I still think Boucher could be a valuable depth piece nonetheless for some team around the NBA. When it comes to the draft pick situation for Toronto, they do own all of their own future first-round picks after their pick conveyed this year to San Antonio, which ultimately became Rob Dillingham, which was traded to Minnesota. The Raptors now own their own first-round picks for the next 7 years. They also have control of the Pacers' 2026 first-round pick as a direct result of the Pascal Siakam trade. I think Toronto did pretty solid in the OG Anunoby trade. I think they did pretty well as well in the Pascal Siakam trade, given the circumstances, given the fact that they didn't trade them with multiple years of team control. I think things worked out okay for Toronto, but obviously in the heart of their rebuild, they're just not a very good team right now. They're extremely young. They have a coach who I think is still learning the ropes of being an NBA coach, but his system specifically, also Grady Dick, I didn't mention earlier, need to mention him. I really love Grady Dick. Forgot to mention him as part of the core nucleus of Toronto Raptors basketball moving forward. Long-term cap space. So this is an important discussion here too. For a lot of teams, they try and build, whether that be through the draft or through trades or through free agency. Toronto right now is in such an interesting spot because for the 2025 offseason, given the players that they already have on their roster with Quickly, his big contract, Scotty Barnes' big contract, and RJ Barrett's pretty sizable contract, they have essentially no practical cap space this offseason. They can use the mid-level exception. I'm not sure if they actually will or not. It's going to be interesting to see if they're able to bring in a player on that to Toronto, given the current state of their team, because they already have so much significant money committed to Barrett, Quickly, Barnes, Jakob Poeltl as well if they don't trade him. they just don't have a lot of ways to open up actual usable cap space. So you have to keep that in mind here too for Toronto. The foreseeable future doesn't paint them as a team that's going to be able to spend in free agency. So that makes the trade deadline, that makes the NBA draft even more important for this team, which is why I think this 2025 NBA trade deadline is such an important one for Toronto. So will they be buyers or will they be sellers? This is the interesting thing with Toronto, right? I think looking at the team on paper, they're not very good. They haven't won a ton of games this year. I think everyone would typically paint this team as just a flat-out seller. They have some veteran players to trade like Bruce Brown, like Kelly Olynyk, like Jakob Poeltl, like Chris Boucher, like we've talked about. The issue is that's not Masai Ujiri's DNA. Even when he sells, he still tends to buy. You think about trading away Pascal Siakam. You think about trading away OG Anunoby. Well, then what did he go do at the deadline? He traded a first-round pick for Kelly Olynyk. And I think the biggest thing here is Masai Ujiri is constantly looking for value. And I understand that thought process, but I do think in ways that has kind of hurt the Toronto Raptors a little bit too. In a vacuum, Masai Ujiri is trying to do his best to accrue assets, trade players for what he deems positive value. Getting 3 first-round picks for Pascal Siakam is somewhat of an example of that. But on the flip side, trading 1 first-round pick for Kelly Olynyk, even though that's probably a valuable addition, Kelly Olynyk's a good player, worth the pick that they gave up, it hasn't really benefited Toronto's actual franchise direction, and it kind of comes with an opportunity cost where the team is maybe a little bit better than they even should be. Now, right now this season, they've been losing a lot. They're going to be a top 10 pick in the draft for sure. So it's not like it's really hurting them that much, but I do just think overall there is some real hesitancy I have with just flat out labeling the Raptors as a seller, even though I myself, if I were in the shoes of Masai Ujiri, would be operating pretty heavily as a seller. I just don't expect Masai Ujiri to solely operate as a seller. I think he's always looking for opportunities to find talent, add talent to his roster, and that might be what he does again this year, even if it does cost them some form of draft capital for a rebuilding team, which is very different than how a majority of the other NBA organizations operate around this time of the year. So when it comes to teams to trade with, we've talked about this at length a little bit, but I think these are all pretty good options to discuss. The Los Angeles Lakers centered around Jakob Poeltl and Bruce Brown. Either of those players could make some sense. The Lakers, with D'Angelo Russell's contract, with Gabe Vincent's contract, with Jared Vanderbilt's contract, could be a real option to make either a move for a big man. There's been so many rumors and speculation about the Lakers looking for a real center to play next to Anthony Davis. Jakob Poeltl could definitely fit that role. Otherwise, looking at Bruce Brown, the kind of player he is, the way that he can impact winning on talented teams could make some sense for the Lakers if they could center something around the contracts of Jared Vanderbilt, Gabe Vincent, and then maybe looking at a collection of second-round picks in that deal. The Phoenix Suns I have here as an option for Kelly Olynyk. So the one thing that we've talked about so far with Phoenix, even though they cannot get in on Jakob Poeltl, they can theoretically trade 1 player for 2. So they can't aggregate salaries together. They cannot trade 2 players themselves for 1, but they can do the other way. They can reverse that where they trade 1 player for 2. So maybe could they dump someone like Jusuf Nurkic, who's just had a terrible season, honestly, for the Phoenix Suns? Could they dump him to Toronto, include some form of draft capital, and try and walk out with Kelly Olynyk and some other player? And that might be the best option for Phoenix if they can get a floor-stretching big man who can handle the floor, handle the ball, push in transition, and operate around the break, above the break for them. That could be a really great option, just like it is for the Los Angeles Clippers. We've talked about already as a change of pace spell option for them. Now for Phoenix, if they trade, Jusuf Nurkic for Kelly Olynyk, they are basically going in on Kelly Olynyk being a starting center for them and really buying into, the floor spacing, which I do think makes some sense for Mike Budenholzer. You think about him winning a championship with Brook Lopez being a predominantly stretched big for them. Maybe that's the way Phoenix could look to go. For the Clippers, it would be more so viewing Kelly Olynyk as this versatile off-the-bench option, which I do think is a better role for him, especially in the current iteration of NBA basketball. The Milwaukee Bucks, another team to possibly watch for. They have the contracts of Bobby Portis and Pat Connaughton to move. So that's where someone like Kelly Olynyk or Chris Boucher could make some sense. The Bucks have consistently been looking to improve their defense. Boucher could help that, but Olynyk could give them, again, that floor spacing option, just like we talked about with Brook Lopez. Expanding that, adding a little bit more natural size and length without sacrificing ball handling, playmaking, decision making. As you can tell, I'm very optimistic about the positive impact Kelly Olynyk could have across the league, and teams like Phoenix, the Clippers, and the Bucks, who don't have a lot of flexibility, Olynyk might be the best option that they could realistically target and maybe even acquire. The Golden State Warriors are another interesting team to talk about here because they have DeAnthony Melton's contract to use, and with Melton's injury, essentially this would be a contract plus pick situation. The Warriors would give up Melton's contract and a pick to go out and get someone like a Kelly Olynyk, to go out and get someone like a Chris Boucher. Now when you're talking about what draft compensation goes with Melton, obviously that would differ depending on whether you're talking about Olynyk or if you're talking about Boucher. The Warriors might be the Raptors' best bet to getting an actual first round pick with a team that I think is pretty desperate right now to actually try and contend with Steph Curry on their roster. The Raptors could be a team that could look to take advantage of that, which I would be extremely fascinated by if they're able to get something done. And then the last one here, this is kind of a different avenue here for Toronto, but I do think it's one that makes a lot of sense, and these two teams have worked together multiple times in the past on trades, both the Kawhi Leonard trade and then Jakob Poeltl getting retraded back to Toronto. I think the Raptors and Spurs could talk once again, and this time it would center around Toronto eating Zach Collins' contract. So the Spurs right now have Zach Collins for a couple of years. His contract is, I would say, relatively large for the type of player that he is, over $17 million. I'm not the biggest Zach Collins fan myself. So I think, for Toronto, if they're looking to get assets back in return, the Spurs have this huge treasure trove of first-round picks and second-round picks. Could San Antonio realistically give up a couple of second-round picks to trade Zach Collins away for, some type of other salary from Toronto? This could be a way for Toronto to accrue extra draft assets. San Antonio opens up a little bit of extra flexibility this offseason, and I think with the way that the Spurs have played and the way Victor Wembanyama specifically has played as like a top 5, top 10-ish player in the NBA this season, arguably, the Spurs could look at themselves as a team that stepping on the accelerator this offseason can make a lot of sense. So getting off of Zach Collins at the trade deadline also would be a sensible thing to do for them if that were to come to fruition. When it comes to my projected activity level, I think, like I said earlier, the Raptors should sell, and I think they'll be semi-active sellers at the trade deadline. Again, with Bruce Brown, with a collection of players that they have on their roster right now, selling could make a lot of sense. Bruce Brown even makes a lot of sense for San Antonio if they were to go that route too. An important seller in a weird market, especially with the new rules, everything that's going on. Toronto has the flexibility. They have some of the mid-sized contracts. They have a bunch of players that I think could be valuable pieces around the league. Jakob Poeltl is a great example again. Bruce Brown, valuable player around the league. Kelly Olynyk, very valuable player around the league, especially given his contract. I think Toronto is one of the most important teams to watch this trade deadline because they could be a real facilitator for actual movement at the NBA trade deadline. This trade deadline is going to be weird. It's going to be almost like a finger trap where you can't move one side or the other, right? You got a finger trap here, you're kind of stuck, right? You need one team to be able to kind of mitigate that, one team to be able to help other teams out in those situations. And I think Toronto specifically is going to be that organization that could help teams out, get trades done, get deals done, operate as a third team, operate as the second team. They're going to be very, very helpful and very useful this trade deadline if Masai Ujiri wants to be. Again, that's a big if, but I think that they have the pieces, they have the current collection of talent and everything to get something like that done at the deadline. I really hope you guys did enjoy. If you did, leave a like, subscribe to the channel for more content moving forward. Again, comment We the North down below. Thanks again, guys, and we'll catch you in the very next Utility Sports video.